U.S. President Joe Biden has urged pro-Palestinian protesters on university campuses in the country to uphold the rule of law. During an address in Washington, President Biden said order must prevail, stressing the need for people to protest peacefully. The president's speech comes as police detained more than 2,000 people nationwide in college rallies and protest camps. That includes 209 arrests early on Thursday at the University of California in Los Angeles.
The first is the right to free speech and for people to peacefully assemble and make their voices heard. The second is the rule of law. Both must be upheld. We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent. The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country. We are a civil society, and order must prevail. Throughout our history, we've often faced moments like this because we are a big, diverse, free-thinking, and freedom-loving nation. In moments like this, there are always those who rush in to score political points. But this isn't a moment for politics. It's a moment for clarity. So let me be clear. Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not peaceful protest. It's against the law. Dissent is essential to democracy, but dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying the rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog has expressed deep concern towards the Israeli people and Jewish community around the world following the mass protests in the U.S. universities. And a solidarity broadcast message from Jerusalem, he condemned what he called the rise in hostilities and threats from international universities. He says the people of Israel stand with the Jewish community amid the anti-Semitism driven by ignorance and misinformation. The Israeli president emphasized the importance of working together to ensure that all remaining hostages held by Hamas are freed.
Dear sisters and brothers, to our friends on campuses and in Jewish communities across the United States and all over the world, to those who stand by and defend the Jewish people and the state of Israel, to all people of goodwill. From Jerusalem, our eternal capital, I say to you, the people of Israel are with you. We hear you. We see the shameless hostility and threats. We feel the insult, the breach of faith and breach of friendship. We share the apprehension and concern. We see prominent academic institutions, halls of history, culture, and education contaminated by hatred and anti-Semitism, fueled by arrogance and ignorance, and driven by moral failings and disinformation. We watch in horror as the atrocities of October 7th against Israel are celebrated and justified. We hear you. We recognize your heroic efforts. We are with you, and we are here for you. In the face of violence, harassment, and intimidation, as masked cowards smash windows and barricade doors, as they assault the truth and manipulate history, together we stand strong. Together, we will continue building our flourishing, life-affirming nation. As they chant for intifada and genocide, we will work together to free our hostages held by Hamas and fight for civil liberties of the entire free world and our right to believe and belong, for the right to live proudly, peacefully, and securely as Jews, as Israelis, anywhere. Next week, the Jewish people will mark Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day. We will speak of the dark times of the past, and we will remember the miracle of our rebirth in our ancient homeland, the Jewish democratic state of Israel, and throughout the Jewish world. Together we shall overcome. In the face of this terrifying resurgence of anti-Semitism, do not fear, stand proud, stand strong for your freedom. Israel stands with you. Israel cares for you. We care for you. We are here for you.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog, as we mentioned earlier, demonstrations in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza have spread across university campuses around the world in recent weeks. Here's a look at some of the pro-Palestinian campus protests around the world. We begin with Australia, where pro-Palestinian protest camps have appeared in at least 7 schools across Australia, including the University of Queensland and the University of Sydney. So far, violent scenes that have erupted in universities in the US have not been repeated in Australia. In the United Kingdom, pro-Palestinian protests have been held at universities across the country since the early days of Israel's war in Gaza, some setting up encampments. Students in the English cities of Newcastle, Leeds, Bristol and Warwick have set up tents outside their university buildings. In Paris, France, pro-Palestinian protests have erupted at Sciences Po, one of the country's most highly ranked universities, and the Sorbonne University. Over in India, protests have been held at the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi in solidarity with students protesting in Colombia. In Canada, protests against Israel's war in Gaza have swept campuses, including at McGill University and the University of Toronto and the University of British Columbia. We end with Lebanon, where hundreds of students gathered at campuses, waving Palestinian flags and demanding their universities boycott companies that do business in Israel. Some protesters say that they're inspired by protests on U.S. campuses. Joining us now is Global Affairs Analyst Edward Opie. He joins us from Dallas, Texas. Edward, great to see you as always. First off, what's your assessment of these protests, this mass protests, especially across the United States, where they seem to have turned violent?
Well, I don't know. Thank you for having me. I think what is interesting in today's world is that the Palestinians are now emboldened. A few years ago, the story has always been one-sided about the Jewish people, the American interest, and all of that. Now, the Palestinians, Americans, are feeling, we too are Americans, and we too contribute to this taxpayers' money that is used to support Israel, to embolden Israel to do what Israel is doing. So they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to tell them, okay, don't do this, don't do that. So the story is no longer about the Jewish people. It's no longer about the Israelis. Everybody's got a pain in this fight. And I think it behooves them now to go back and say, how can we find a two-state solution so that we can curtail this? But this is not going to stop. It's not going to stop. I don't care what Biden says. I don't care what the Israeli president is saying. The world is not about the Jewish issues. There are conflicts, there are pains, there are hurt all over the world. So the Jewish people should not think that their own situation is different from that of anybody. We should go toward peace. We should find ways to live peacefully and not have to think that we are entitled to something and somebody else is entitled to that. The issue about the hostages being held, it tells you, with all the resources Israel has and all the support they have in America, they haven't been able to find their own people being held. So it's a challenge to their own intelligence and their own military mind. And that shows that the human spirit is hard to be suppressed. When you push people to the wall, they're going to do something. And that's what they're doing. I don't commend it. I don't condone it. But I think Israel should now know the rest of the world may no longer be silent about what is being going on about the Palestinian situation with them.
I have so many questions to what you have just responded to, but let's just focus on the protests. The University of Texas in Austin has also been a scene of one of these protests. As of yesterday, there were arrests on campus. Even the school authorities had to release a statement saying that while people have the right to protest, those protests and the encampments that have been set up on campus are illegal. Are these protests justified?
Well, they're justifying the sense of the mind of the people who are doing the protest. And then, they're expressing their own anger in the way they see fit. The freedom of speech. The freedom of speech, violence is not part of it, but the violence can also be part of it. We know how the civil rights in America has happened. We know how countries have protested colonial rule. Some of it got it peacefully, some of it got it by fighting the colonial masters. So that's where we are in the world now. I think we should be able to again go back and allow people to express their anger. And this is more like expression of anger about things that have been going on for some time. And so the university campuses in the US, they're grappling with these challenges. What do we do now? How do we tell one side, oh, you can do it, and they'll tell another side you cannot do it? The Palestinians in America are emboldened, and that is just something that they were not doing a few years ago. Now they're doing it not only in America, they're doing it everywhere they are, and Israel is being shocked because, whatever they are saying is not discouraging people from doing what they're doing.
I'm not sure, if the Israeli government's plan really is to shut people's opinions across the world, but we know that we've seen protests like these rise up in different scenarios. For example, the apartheid movement in the South Africa, the apartheid rule in South Africa also resulted in protests across the world, people calling for the end of apartheid, and then, eventually South Africa earned the rights to rule at the end of the day with President Mandela coming into power. And then we've also seen other issues. So people do think, that the Israel-Hamas war is a lot bigger than, what countries are trying to make it be. But what are the larger implications of these protests coming from schools? Even in the US, where we have seen, race protests back in the 60s and the 70s, the result of it now is that, black and white can be in the same place at the same time, have equal opportunities, even though that's still arguable. But what are the implications of these protests that are happening, especially on the campuses? What do you foresee?
But the campuses have always been the federal ground for this sort of stuff because the students feel that, hey, they are part of society, they are human beings, and they come from nationalities and ethnic groups, and so they can't keep silent. They are no longer going to just say, it's all about my books and going to school. They're going to take on issues. Even during the time of the Vietnam War, it was the students' protests in campuses that forced the hands of the government to pull out the war. So yeah, even in Nigeria, Nigerian students, it's all over the world. The students are a potent aspect of the public, and sometimes when they do it, because they do it in the ivory towers, they do it in grounds where learning is supposed to be nurtured, to say, hey, there are two sides to every conflict. Now in the case of Israel, and the Palestinian, there are many aspects of it. So what they're doing, whether it's, the violent aspect is, I don't know how to describe to say this is what we need to do in order so that it's not violent. It's going to be violent. And so maybe this will now force the hands of the leaders of the world to now come to terms and said, okay, Israel, this is what you need to do, Palestine, this is what you need to do. If you guys don't do it, we're going to withdraw resources from both sides. And then let's see what happens. So I hope UN is watching this so that sometime this year when they get in the General Assembly, although the UN thing is just always a joke, you just pass resolutions, nothing happens. But the protest is encouraged. I don't want the violence. But this is going to force the hands of both America, Israel, and the rest of the world to now come to terms in order to see if we can have a permanent solution.
When you talk of violence, I'm reminded of scenes like we're showing our viewers on the screen, police presence on the campuses. They have been criticized for being there, and they've also been criticized for being a part of the problem. The fact that the protests are peaceful, well, largely peaceful. Some of the students say police presence only heightens tensions on the ground. What do you make of that?
Well, when it comes to U.S. universities, they have the campus police, and oftentimes the campus police is just, just to patrol the campus ground, and they don't have the resources. So when they anticipate something like this, some of this crowd have always been large crowd, then they reach out to the outside, the city police itself. Sometimes they call the National Guard. And of course, the police thing, in the police thing, what are you going to see? You're going to see some of them that are sympathetic to Israel or Jewish thing. You're going to see them that are, and oftentimes it's going to be them sympathizing with Israel. And they are human beings, they're going to try to trigger something, and they pull back, and then they blame the crowd for what's going on. And so it's just one of those things where if the police will keep out, maintain a distance, okay, set back line, 1,000 feet. But when you start getting in front of people who are angry, something is going to happen. It is a cake of gunpowder. Something is going to happen, and then the police is going to get, the reason to do what they do. If you look at the protests of University of Kent in Ohio, at the time, the police that shot people. They killed students. And then later on, they apologized. They didn't apologize. They just, made a statement. They felt that they were threatened. How can you feel threatened when the students oftentimes are not armed? But that's an American police thing. They always look for reason to shoot at people or do something. Because at the end of the day, the investigation lasts forever. Nobody gets a conclusive solution to it, and they do it again. So the protest, I'm in Dallas. I go SMU, university here. It's going on everywhere. It's going on everywhere. But I think it's an opportunity for the world leaders, whoever they are, to now, come to terms and make a firm stand. Israel, you're not going to get American military support if you don't stop this. Palestinian, if you don't do this, you're not going to get humanitarian support. There's going to be a way to force the hands of those two warring factions. We can, on one hand, give a group arms, on the other hand, give a group food. If you want to stop this, give both sides equal amount of arms, and maybe we'll see that they will pull back. Just like we have the rights to carry gun in America. Nobody's going to come to your home knowing that you're going to shoot them if they show up. So we shouldn't be supporting Israel militarily while we're trying to give food to the Palestinians on the justification that one is angering the other. Both sides have been angered each other since they started to exist in 1948.
Your solutions to ending the war in Gaza, but demands that these protesters are asking for, majority of them are calling for colleges to divest from companies that support Israel and the war in Gaza. We know people have the right to peaceful protest, but you get the impression that the students really don't understand the reasons behind this war or the implications of their actions.
Well, you brought up the issue of appetite. At the time, people were calling on companies doing business in South Africa to withdraw. And, that created its own impact. So now people are doing the same thing. Let people, the universities that have their money invested with this company, they have to now think twice about it. Or companies that are doing business with these universities, they have to now think twice about it. Again, it's got to be something. I don't know what that is. I don't have a magic wand, but that's got to be something to force the hand of the American government to now say, all these years we've supported Israel, this is what we're getting for it, and the Palestinians, this is what you guys need to do in order to stop. And it's we've had many peace talks. We have many Nobel Prize winners on both sides because of peace for Palestine and Israel, but it hasn't gotten a permanent peace. We're looking for a permanent peace. I think America made a mistake when they created Israel by putting Israel in the middle of. If they had moved one side as I don't see a country where you come in, you're in the middle of another country, and then the people on one side, they have to get a pass to go to the other country. I mean, it's just like what we had in the East Germany and West Germany, and when the wall came down in 1989 because of Reagan, they unified. I don't see unifying these two people. So do we create a country for Hamas? I mean, we have the Hamas section country, and then we have the Hezbollah section, another Palestinian North or Palestinian South, and Israel is in the middle. I don't know. But that's a geographic mistake they made by putting Israel in the middle of Palestine or Palestine, whatever it is they did. I think now it's hurting everybody.
Edward Opie will have to revisit this issue sooner than later as the war continues in Gaza and negotiations continue also for a ceasefire in Gaza for the Palestinians who have been largely depreciated in the region. Thank you again for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
More reactions now to the war in Gaza. Turkey has suspended trade with Israel as a result, citing the worsening humanitarian tragedy in the Gaza Strip. According to the Turkish Trade Ministry, the measures would be in place until Israel allows an uninterrupted and sufficient flow of aid into Gaza. Trade between the two countries was worth over $7 billion last year. Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz accused Turkish President Recep Erdogan of acting like a dictator. He said Mr. Erdogan was disregarding the interests of the Turkish people and businessmen and ignoring international trade agreements. On the other hand, Turkish Trade Minister Omar Bolat criticized Israel's uncompromising attitude towards a ceasefire, as well as the humanitarian situation in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Back in 1949, Turkey was the first Muslim-majority country to recognize Israel, but relations have worsened in recent decades. Israeli opposition leader and former Prime Minister Yair Lapid has met with UAE Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah, with discussions centered on the worsening humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. It is Mr. Lapid's first visit to the UAE since the start of the war. Both underlined the importance of two-state solution, a ceasefire, increased aid into Gaza, and efforts to avoid the conflict spreading across the region. Israeli opposition leaders said that the release of Hamas hostages is urgent, adding that every country in the region can influence the deal. Earlier this week, Israel reportedly backed a proposed 40-day ceasefire and the exchange of hostages and prisoners during talks in Cairo, while Hamas was considering its response. World Central Kitchen Organization is back in the Gaza Strip after about a month of suspension due to the killing of 7 of its employees in an Israeli airstrike. A volunteer supported by WCK was seen inside a tent cooking and preparing meals to distribute to displaced Palestinians. 7 World Central Kitchen staff were killed by an Israeli airstrike after dropping off humanitarian aid in the central part of Gaza on April 1st. The IDF, which apologized for the incident, admitted it was a grave mistake on their part. However, WCK demanded an independent investigation into the incident.